question that I was expecting you to ask me. That's completely thrown me. That's really funny. You have really done your research there, Vaughn. With regard to the elephant rider principle, and this is just what is behind, the how might we statements when we put them together. So basically, humans have two decision-making systems. The elephant would be the unconscious, and the rider would be when you get on that elephant and you click the conscious into play. So you need to be riding that elephant to make sure your how might we is a good how might we question. How's the question? When participants, when customers, when they're asked to share opinions, that the neural activity in the brain increases, and you are then happy that you are being asked for input and for insight. It's the tacit knowledge, as you say, but also AI doesn't have empathy. And it's such a key part of the design thinking process that it could craft a solution that on paper seems perfect. You come to actually adopt that with real life living beings, and you've gotten the way that humans might interact differently with each other. It's the empathy piece that's missing from it.
Welcome, Lucy. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, look, it's our pleasure. We really appreciate you making time to talk about sort of innovation, entrepreneurship, that sort of thing, and all your sort of experience. So, hey, look, I've done a little bit of homework around your background. Obviously, we've known each other for a fair while on LinkedIn and that sort of thing. I understand you're a graduate of Patterson College, which is, I think, pretty much the number one sort of entrepreneurship college globally. You're a leader in that sort of voluntary and community and social enterprise space as well. Do a lot of work around that. And you're largely a consultant for SMEs using design thinking, that sort of thing, yeah?
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up in a nutshell. You should turn up somewhere and do my elevator pitch for.
Would you mind perhaps just sharing a bit more about your background for the audience?
Sure. So I started out many, many moons ago in third sector and predominantly healthcare management. I started working with teams, coaching before coaching was a thing, and just looking at how we could get the best performance within an environment where obviously cost and budget has to be the main concern and the priority area. And then I sort of moved from that it was a bit more protracted journey perhaps, but into actually then working for myself and doing similar kinds of things for myself, using the elements of design thinking and basically just creative innovation to work with SMEs, to work with people within the third sector or the not-for-profit sector, as you may know better, in Australia. And that's what I do now, provide workshops, facilitation around problem solving, whether that is a problem that a team may have, whether that problem is bringing a new product or service to market. Whatever that problem is, we use design thinking to be able to solve it creatively and make sure that you are solving it with empathy for your end users, your customers, your staff team at the heart of everything.
Amazing. So how many years has it been now that you've been involved?
Gosh, I would say design thinking specifically the last 10 years, definitely. I was using it prior to that without knowing necessarily what it was. And I was at a TED talk in Newcastle in the UK, and I saw a woman called Clara Gangara Westaway on stage, watched her talk and thought, that is amazing, the way she is describing the process that she goes through when looking at solving a problem around a particular product. Went away, did a bit of research and thought, there's a word for that. There's a word for sort of what I'm doing. And that really then got me to focus in on design thinking, that human-centered approach as being where I wanted to be, kind of the environment in which I wanted to work within, and have the capacity to allow us to be a bit more creative rather than constrained in a typical way when we talk about business growth and business development.
Yeah, I love that. It certainly resonates a little bit with my sort of journey. It was a bit of an aha moment when I sort of come across it. I've been self-employed previously in a different sector and operating largely under the sort of older kind of management sort of styles or ways of thinking, that sort of thing. And when I come across this, it was just a light bulb moment. So, I've been diving into that as well. But hey, really interesting that you say that you were kind of doing this stuff without even knowing.
Yeah. just didn't even realise it, but I was always the person who was in a meeting thinking, there's got to be a better way of doing
Yeah, yeah.
this. We bring problems to the table. I remember having a manager at the time, the chief exec of the healthcare company I was working for at the time, said, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And I remember thinking, that's horrible. Why go to somebody with a solution without having properly researched what the problem is and whether the problem, what you think the problem is that the actual problem? You know, like it's kind of like asking a million questions, but never touching on the right question. And so I was kind of then always the person who was saying, well, we could just try this little exercise and we could just do this a little bit differently. Sometimes to great effect, sometimes to very stony-faced committee board members. But, you know, you've got to try these things. And then obviously when I left the world of employment and became self-employed, I've used then that design thinking process and that creative process within each of the last 3 businesses that I have actually built.
Yeah, yeah. It can be like that when the sort of new way knocks up against the old way. There is a few stony faces sometimes. But look, what I'm finding more and more as well is that people are starting to embrace, just a bit more sort of fun and doing something different away from their business as usual, right? So I think the acceptance of different sort of types of activities, that sort of thing, is certainly growing. But hey, look, I'm really interested. Before we sort of move on there, I came across something called the PPP Framework.
Right.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
I feel ridiculous. I feel absolutely ridiculous. Question that I was expecting you to ask me. That's completely thrown me. That's really funny. You have really done your research there, Vaughn. It's a bit of a punk attitude. I'm not obviously conventionally, when you would look at me, I'm not a punk as such. But I am married to another half who is very much started out as a punk, you know, the hair, the outfits and everything back in the day. And we just both we work in similar but different sectors. So I do the design thinking. He's very much lean, Kaizen, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of different influences that just give you a different attitude and a different way of looking at things. And so rather than punk being seen as a negative thing, it's just I've kind of put this framework together that is around punk and is about purposeful punk, about polite punk, about productive punk. And it's the way that you then use design thinking. Purposeful is very much around sort of designing for the impact and empathizing with people. And then being polite is again about, it just furthers that, leading with empathy and kind of respecting each other and the people that you are trying to solve a problem for within the ideate process. And then obviously the productive is the whole idea to implementation area, so around prototyping and testing. And it just, I think in a time when we expect disruption to happen overnight or in wild and wonderful ways, it just gives the smaller businesses and the client group that I work with a way of disrupting that means they can make smaller changes and feel as though they're being a bit different about things and can kind of do that almost smugly, knowing that they are innovating, even though it's still within this very contained framework for them. Yeah. You totally threw me with that question.
Yeah, yeah. Look, a couple of things I'll take out of that is it's probably a really good positioning as well to still resonate with the punk era, if you like, of perhaps some of the still senior sort of people in organisations that would recall that. And also a little bit around, punk was on the fringe and things like that. And often a lot of entrepreneurship is about those sort of crazy sort of moments and things like that. And so a little bit of a nod to that. So just to finish that off, who's your favourite punk band?
Crikey. I really like SLF. My husband was a big Sex Pistols fan, so I can probably go through all of theirs. X-Ray Specs, Polystyrene, there's some amazing Blondie. I mean, I kind of think that kind of not quite punk, not quite new wave, it's on the fringe. But
Brilliant. Well, yes, Sex Pistols for me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that era is kind of finished. And hey, look, let's perhaps have a bit of a chat now around some of your experience of thinking about your work and how you're sort of using that sort of design thinking, human-centered innovation sort of approach. Can you sort of just expand a bit more around your daily or typical kind of work that you'll do with somebody using that?
Okay, so I would say, first of all, there is no typical day, and that's probably why I like it. But my client group can range from a CEO or a senior member of a management team that want to work in a one-to-one basis and want to be able to try these things out in the way they are leading their team, or it can be a full team project. So to give an example, I'm currently working with a simulation company, a sports simulation company. We're working with the whole team, and they're really wanting to use the design thinking process to be able to identify what their USP is in the marketplace and get their current users of their simulation technology, I guess you would call it, involved in what they want that to look like as they move forward. Are they wanting it to be for fun? Are they wanting it to improve their sporting activities? That kind of thing. But then I also work with sort of smaller physiotherapy practices. And to them, it is literally, this is what we do. This is where we need to be sustainable. And it's not about making millions and having, places everywhere. It's about, we want to make this fun for our team to feel invested in, and we want the team to be part of the growth process. We don't want to be managing people. We want to be allowing them to also lead us and help us. So that's kind of what a typical day might include. So it's around workshop facilitation. It's around putting together, this is our problem. This is what we want to solve. This is what we're looking to actually achieve. Figuring out whether that is what they need to achieve to get their outcome that they want, or whether it's actually something that's a bit more embedded within what they think it might be. And then working through a series of creative processes and creative exercises just to get them to a point where they can then use design thinking and creative innovation for themselves. And I think with the work that I do, that is really, really important to me. It's one of my sort of intrinsic values, is that whether you want to call me a coach, a consultant, a facilitator, I don't want to be here with you forever. I want you to be able to learn these tools, understand these tools a little bit more, and be able to say at the next sort of crossroad junction that you're at, we know what we can try, we know what we can do again here, so that you're actually getting the skill set. It's being spread about. We're kind of spreading the love. I don't want to keep it all for myself and just tell them what to do and not explain it.
Right, yeah. It's so important, I think, that bit that you're mentioning around sort of embedding it into organisations over the long term. Now, that may take a while, but what's just actually recently happened for me is I worked with an organisation about 3 years ago, helping redesign services and such, and they've been largely operating in that way, but they've asked me to come in for a bit of a refresher where a whole lot of new team members and just sort of continue on helping them with that capability. So really important, but it is awesome when you get to see organisations starting to adopt these different ways.
Yeah.
Really rewarding. But hello, if we can just perhaps come back to that USP organisation that you mentioned, in terms of understanding their selling proposition, etc., like how much of the work are you helping them with that sort of discovering and understanding around the customers, or are you sort of coming in at the point where they feel that they have a bit of knowledge or research from that and then starting to sort of design or craft that proposition? So whereabouts are you in that process?
So when I originally came in to work with them, they said, this is the research we've done. These are who our customers are. This is where we fit. And I said, okay, not that I don't totally agree with you, but I want to make sure, because I want to make sure that any work I carry out, and therefore any work they're paying me for at the end of the day, is as productive to them as possible. So I kind of have to do my own kind of quality check, if you like, at that point to make sure that the right question and the right information is being provided. We then discovered, just from a very few customer interviews and from a little bit of empathy mapping, that what they thought was not what the customers and such like actually wanted. So we just reworked that, revised that, and that's the point that we've then started from. So I can come in at either point, but I will always do my own little bit of qualitative and quantitative data collecting just to make sure that they get the best from the process.
Yeah, brilliant. So You mentioned just a handful of sort of interviews. So how many in that scenario did you complete? Was it
In that scenario, it was a really small number. I think it was about 12 that we did. Yeah. But we literally went in and they gave me, I think, a list of 6 people and said, excuse me, these are great clients. We'd really, have a chat with them. And I said, great, okay, give me another 6 that are your worst clients, the people that complain about the most things, or, just to make sure that we had the correct people and a full spectrum picture of what was happening.
Great. Yeah. So then with the piece that you're talking about with perhaps a physiotherapist, I think you mentioned where it sounded very much like they were looking just as much for a solution, but a culture change and buy-in from their team as they were perhaps what the solution was.
Very much so. It was around them wanting to do business a bit differently and sort of enjoy the process of the business rather than just enjoying the spoils at the end of the day. So they really did want to make sure that the team were involved, that the team were enjoying things, that they were taking autonomy and ownership of certain things, but without being told they had to do it, that it just kind of was happening almost organically, even though it wasn't organic. It was kind of, we figured out what that would need to look like and went from there. Yeah, so culture, it's a massive thing. I mean, design thinking, as you'll know yourself, can be amazing at transforming culture and getting buy-in from teams. And then you start to see business growth in a different way that still gets you the financial outcomes that you'll be searching for, but it's not just all about Excel spreadsheets and crunching the numbers. There's a lot to be said about having a team who are happy in their work, who are wanting to go out and bring back additional information that you can then use to build the business upon.
Yeah, but a bit more of the how they go about business, right?
Yeah, very definitely. Yeah.
Sure. So again, just coming back to that, perhaps that example you're having there with the digital sort of product there in the sports sector. So you brought this information, if you like, into I assuming the sort of workshop and that. So what's the next step from there in your process?
It's about identifying who on the team is going to be wholly for this and who on the team might be a little bit protagonistic about it, and then bringing them on board in ways that work for them so that they're all on the same page in the first instance. And then using the tools that we have within our playbooks, our toolkits, to actually craft creative opportunities, creative exercises that will resonate with them so they can understand that they are almost hitting their personal agenda targets at the same time as we are hitting what the team and what the company need to be. So I think it's a great way of helping us to kind of balance the politics and the dynamics and such like a little bit. So that would be the next stage of it. I would then craft a project outline, if you like, a proposal outline, that I would have an idea of what I was going to use. But if I was to call it a plan, that would be unfair because it's very flexible. So it's kind of a plan and kind of hold it lightly. So you've got an idea of where things need to go to get the outcomes that are required. But at the same time, you're actually able to be flexible with that and know that if someone doesn't seem to work well within a particular exercise, you can change it up.
Yeah, it's pretty key part, is what I've been finding out too over the years, is that as you mentioned, and that's some of the essence, right, of design, and is that iteration and being open to change, so being agile, that sort of thing. So I used to live by plans, and now they're not my favourite things so much anymore, right? But so can you perhaps share with us? You mentioned some of your favourite tools, like, I mean, a really common one is around sort of how might we statements, that sort of thing. And my sense is that how might we statements are, because they're so common, it's like, it's just, it's a how might we statement. We just do it. We tick the box. But could you maybe dive into where you've used how might we statements to great effect? Like, if you can give us an example, and even perhaps some tips on how to make them really, really valuable.
Well, I think for me, when I think initially of a how might we statement, I'm thinking more of it's a statement, but I like to construct it as if it was a question. So if you think of you're writing a postcard to your valued customers, your valued clients, then your how might we statement would be a question to those people. So how might we, that the people who are kind of intending to solve the problem you have, do something for you being the people who the problem is most impacting, so that your needs are satisfied. And if you reframe it into a question, it makes things so much easier to actually then construct the statement itself. Tips for better how might we statements, I would definitely say you need to be basing them on the problems and the insights that you gather from your research. You need to keep them open-ended, but you need them to be very much kind of focused in on the outcome. You need to frame them in a way that sparks the ideation process. So keep them kind of positive, keep them, use inspirational language as much as is possible, because it's that awkward thing between, as an example that people might understand better, when we talk about SMART targets, SMART, specific, measurable, and all of the acronym there. It's about finding that balance between what is too big and what is kind of going beyond the parameters, and what is too focused that essentially will stop you in your tracks in the ideation process. Because if a how might we statement is too focused, it's not allowing you to be creative with it. So, keep the language as inspiring as possible, keep them positive, keep them open-ended, but always make sure you have that outcome that you're focusing in on.
Right, and with the piece that you're saying of too focused, too narrow, it's sort of I suppose too constraining, or it doesn't allow that as much freedom of thought. But on the flip side, what if it's too broad? What are the pitfalls there?
Well, if it's too broad, you're going to move away completely from what the actual problem is that you're wanting to solve. You're going to go sort of so far left or so far right that the problem is going to be adopted to you at that point in time. So, you've got to kind of have almost a checkbox of these are the people, this is the problem, this is the outcome that, we're looking for, the pain points and such like. Use it alongside an empathy map. And I think that always helps you to come back to, okay, we understand what the pains are, we understand what the struggles are, we understand how we can help them improve that. And that will just help you get that balance right. But as with anything, it's a thing that you get better at doing the more you do it. And it's a thing that doesn't matter how often you do it, you can still get it wrong sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you said about an example, but when I'm working with teams and we're doing this, I like to originally get everybody working together alone. I like to get them to all write their individual how might we statements, and then almost use dot voting and such like, just the same way as you would for any ideas, to say which have got the common themes that are featured, which are the sort of common words or the language that's used, and then pull them all together so that you have the common themes, the common language into one statement. And of course, at the moment, AI is another great tool for helping do that.
Yeah.
You don't need to do this all by, brain struggle at the moment. You can sort of use AI to help you make some of these things that little bit easier. But the reason that I love, it's one of my favourite sort of areas of the ideation process, of starting the ideation process, is because there is so much psychology that is behind a how might we statement. So you mentioned, I don't know whether it was when we were recording or when we were chatting briefly offline, with regard to the elephant and rider principle. And this is just what is behind, the how might we statements when we put them together. So basically, humans have two decision-making systems. The elephant would be the unconscious, and the rider would be when you get on that elephant and you click the conscious into play. So you need to be riding that elephant to make sure your how might we is a good how might we question. How's the question? Scientists have proved, sort of research after research, that when participants, when customers, when they're asked to share opinions, that the neural activity in the brain increases, and you are then happy that you are being asked for input and for insight. The might suggests that we might find an answer, we might not. It takes the pressure away from there being a definitive answer and a definitive solution to this, but it gives you the emotional investment that people need to have for the rest of the design thinking process. And then obviously the we is just because you trust the relationship. You're working as part of a group, as part of a community. And so it gives you that sense of ownership and it gives you that initial buy-in. So those three simple words, how might we, have so much psychology behind them and actually allow you to engage your conscious thought, get that rider, the conscious, onto the elephant, the unconscious, so that you are working in a way that is, it's calmer, it's focused, it's got a positive energy to it, it's kind of flexible to change, rather than the unconscious, which is just there, or the subconscious, which is just there to keep us happy, healthy, safe. And that can be kind of really fast and it's kind of automatic and we forget why we're doing the things we're doing. I think that's one of the reasons that it just gets the psychology of it, get everything in place. It starts to fit all the pieces of the jigsaw as you move forward through the remainder of the ideation process and beyond.
Yeah, no, I love it. Really, really appreciate that depth around the psychology there, and it's something I haven't really been able to articulate that well myself. But in terms of linking it to elephant and rider, which we'll probably talk a little bit around it in the implementing side of things as well. But can you sort of share with us if you can recall, like, I just want to dive in a little bit around that facilitation piece around it. So, you know, what I've heard so far is it's really important not to be sort of too broad where you're kind of lost.
Yeah.
Not too narrow that you're sort of unable to sort of be creative in that. And you mentioned dot voting and things like that, which is, you know, a fairly sort of common facilitation sort of technique. But I'm interested when you've got this room of diverse sort of people, and we tend to have some people who sort of know what the answer is or how something should be, and also the loudest voice or the highest paid person in the room, that sort of thing. How are you balancing all of that when there's I suppose, heat map of what they would like to see, and then still managing those sort of other dynamics?
Would either do it one of two ways. So I would either have had, or with every workshop I would do, I would have 15, 20-minute conversations with each individual participant prior to starting anyway. So I'm kind of aware of the personal agendas that might be there. If it seems as though it's too much as I would refer to it as a them and us situation, where those who have the decision-making power or hold the financial purse strings are going to be too loud in the room and not allow others to be as involved, I would run two separate workshops. So you'd almost have them in, you know, room next door to each other, and sort of backwards and forwards. Obviously, with other facilitators there, we don't generally just leave people in rooms on their own. But I would do it that way because I think that ultimately, as long as you are able to understand the human side, understand that everybody needs and wants to be heard, even if their solution isn't necessarily the outcome, then that is what it's about. It's back to that politics and dynamics, you know, but find out everybody's personal agendas, what they want to get personally from the day, and how that fits into the overall agenda or the outcomes that are required by the organisation. And you can very simply overcome most of those problems. You're always going to get that occasional aubergine in the room that just does not, you know, doesn't want to play ball or whatever. But that's down to me as a facilitator to sort of manage rather than it being too much of a problem.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lucy. So I'd like to just maybe talk a little bit around AI. You mentioned AI and it's fairly early and things like that. And obviously we need to sort of keep up to speed with how things are going. And you mentioned about using it to help craft a how might we statement. How else are you using it in your process, perhaps in the creativity piece, that sort of thing?
You know, I use AI in a lot of ways, but I don't tend to use it within the creative part of it. I use it within the admin part of what I'm doing. I think for me, I want to keep the creativity. I enjoy it. You know, it's kind of part of what makes me me. If AI could do my washing or clean the windows or whatever else, that's what I'd be wanting AI to do. And I feel as though at the moment we are too focused on using AI to help us with the creative process when we actually need to be helping like exploring the creative process ourselves first and then using AI just to refine things. For me as a female, I think as well that because AI is obviously learning from what is already out there in the, worldwide interweb, that it tends to be very male bias. It tends to be very white bias. And I think that I kind of don't want to bring too much of that bias into something until I have to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting what you say. I mean, I'm playing around with a little bit, not as much as I probably should on that creativity side, because I sort of see that there are some advantages, perhaps that'll come up with some things that the group hasn't thought of, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
there's also some really interesting research coming out that so far that and again, correct me if I'm wrong around this, but I think it was through MIT or something like that, that the experts that had training around how to prompt well weren't actually that good compared to the group that had no training regarding, I think, actually solving the final business problem.
Right. That's interesting.
It was something like that. And there's a couple other really significant pieces there that that came out of that study. The main takeaway for me is that still people are passing over that thinking to AI, looking for it to solve something for you. But what AI doesn't have, it doesn't have all your tacit knowledge. So your years and years of experience, right?
Yeah. It's the tacit knowledge, as you say, but also AI doesn't have empathy. And it's such a key part of the design thinking process that it could craft a solution that on paper seems perfect. You come to actually adopt that with real life living beings, and you've forgotten the way that humans might interact differently with each other. You've forgotten the nuances that might be involved in communication. It's those kinds of things. And for me at the moment, it's the empathy piece that's missing from it. So it's great for refining things. Or like you mentioned, I have, in fairness, thinking about it, used at the start of a session, if people are struggling to get going with ideas, it's a good way of saying, let's just ask ChatGPT what it thinks, and it just at least gets people starting to think we can say things that are as wild and wonderful as we want to, because that's what ChatGPT just did. So it helps catalyze, it's a good catalyst for something, and it's good to refine something. But I do feel that creative empathy piece, and as you said, the experience that diverse group of people can bring to something is, for me, it's not there yet. And I say yet, and that's probably, I'm also, I don't know about yourself, but I'm also really polite when I use it. I please and thank you all the time. Because if ever the robots rise up, I want them to think, well, she was nice. She was nice to us.
I love it. Yep. So maybe just diving in a little bit to the implementing piece. So you mentioned the elephant and rider. So perhaps you could talk to that about perhaps how much you're using that framework from the Heath Brothers switch, or if there's anything else there around the implementing that you find really useful, drawing on your design thinking, not only the tools, but your experience as well.
I think that regardless of what framework you're going to use, regardless of what KPIs you set yourself, it's a case of just having something out there, getting an MVP to a 7 out of 10, get it out there, start running through that implementation process, start actually prototyping and testing and getting feedback, because you can follow all of the frameworks you want, you can do all of the continued research that you want, but until you actually have crunchy data that comes from the real people or the real customers who are interacting with what you're doing, you're never going to go beyond that.
So let's talk a little bit then about the MVP sort of scenario, and how do you go about, what have you found is a good way of getting people on that journey to MVP? I mean, are you jumping to sort of MVP, or are you sort of helping people sort of craft sort of different prototypes at sort of lower fidelity, that sort of thing?
Yeah, lo-fi prototypes to start with. So anything from, storyboarding, storytelling, the most basic of things. If you can make it with a piece of paper and sticky back plastic, don't know if they had Blue Peter in New Zealand. It's a children's program here, and it was renowned for whenever they make something with kids, it's always with sticky back plastic. So the more Blue Peter, the better. As lo-fi as it can be, I would always give the example of Google Glass, which is a YouTube video that anyone can go on and have a look at, and which is kind of the precursor to the Meta Ray-Bans now that you can.
Right.
So it's the precursor to that, and they literally used coat hangers and pieces of perspex sheeting and things that you would find within your own home or office space. So I'm a big believer in doing that, and whenever we do any of the training or any of the workshops, that is a piece that we do. How can you, think about creating this in a way that you could give it to somebody else? We can get hung up on prototypes having to tell us how well or how badly something might actually work in the end. What we need to remember is that they're there to tell us, can somebody understand what you are trying to help them solve within this prototype? Is, you're looking at this user interface and at the user experience, so not just at the aesthetic, but if I give this to you as a prototype, as an experience, can you understand what I'm asking you to do? Is it simple enough to follow through? It's not about sort of arriving at the end, all singing, all dancing, whistles and bells product or service that you're going to have. So lo-fi prototypes, I can't sort of shout, enough about them. And again, I guess because for me, it allows that extra element of creativity, and it allows people to be involved who maybe aren't great with words and haven't maybe come forward and kind of engaged as much as they would have liked to have done. It allows those who are more tactile and such like to get involved as well. But yeah, I'm kind of, I don't know whether I answered the question there or whether I went off on my own.
No, totally. So with the lo-fi prototypes, are you also involving, if I heard correctly, you're involving customers or potential customers at that point?
Yeah.
So is this during your workshops and that as well? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It takes a certain kind of company to be bold enough to ask a customer or an end user to come in and actually be part of this. But when we get to that prototype stage, what I normally like to do is you almost set it up as a little bit like a challenge for them. So you'll group them into teams, come up with your own prototype. And it's amazing when you've come up with an idea and then you go and say to 3 separate groups of people, go create the prototype, how different those prototypes can still be. So then you would get the end user or the customer in and you would say to them, we're going to kind of present this to you. Can you understand what we're trying to do? Can you understand how you would use it? Does it solve the problem that we think you're having? Is this kind of what you expected? So yeah, the earliest point you can get customers or end users involved, the better outcomes you're going to get.
Wonderful. And when you're typically doing that, sort of letting the customer, end user experience the sort of first prototype, early stage, etc. So how are you doing that? Are you passing that over and letting them sort of, as I say, experience that, or do you tend to run off a perhaps set sort of questions that you're wanting to hone in on? What's your approach?
Roughly set questions, because otherwise you can go off on, like I can, you can go off on tangents left, right and centre, but it's a great experience to then discover other problems that you didn't know they were having, so that you've created one product or service. It allows you to then look at the add-ons that we could do, or the additional integrations and, that kind of thing. So yeah, very much, again, with anything, I have a plan, not a plan, but a rough idea of the questions that you need to have the answers to. Does it make sense? Would this be something you would find simple to use? How do you see yourself using it in real life? Yeah. And then sometimes the responses will obviously bring further questions. Other times they're just really kind of clear of like, yes, no. And it just gives you a much better place to then iterate that prototype and again, before you take that MVP to market.
Right. And at the same time, are you observing them interacting with whatever that prototype is?
Yeah. If we can get permission, we record it.
Right. Okay.
So that you get all of the body language and everything that you can.
Right. And typically, like if you can, like how many sort of customers would you invite in? Is it 1 or 2 or?
No, it would depend on the size of what it was that you wanted to do. But I think from a customer's perspective, if you have, I always say an even number, because there's generally people like to chat in twos when they're feeling a little bit kind of, we're not sure what's going to be happening here. So I would usually go between 4 and 6. And in the same way as I said before, I would say to people, if you've got 2 great customers and if you've got 2 awful customers, those are the people you want in the room. And don't be, You need skin like a rhino sometimes, because if you've got those negative customers in there, they're going to be honest with you. They're not going to tell you that everything's rosy and that, oh yes, that's amazing, please I want to buy it now. They're going to be looking for the fault points, and those are the kind of things that you need so that you can actually then grow your customer base rather than just sitting comfortably with the customers that you interact with regularly because, oh, they're going to be great. And it's really easy, You want to add the challenge at that point so that it doesn't become an issue in the marketplace.
Right. I mean, the worst thing that you can do is just stay in an echo chamber, right, of all positive stuff. I love that approach. I'm really keen just to explore a little bit around when you're doing the prototyping, and you mentioned storyboarding, and no doubt there's some other sort of tools in there. How are you? So we have the how might we statement, then we go and create ideas and prototypes and that. So how are you kind of selecting what idea that you might want to put in front of the customer? If we've got, say, 10 ideas.
Yeah. So for me, it's always about the power of 3. So I'd always have one idea that in an ideal world, this would be what you would kind of be choosing to do. One idea that you would think, actually, our kind of rational brain says this would work in the marketplace, and one wild card. And then if you've got the potential, if you've got the capacity, take those 3 ideas to customers at that stage.
Right. Okay. And is it, sorry, carry on.
No, it could just, in my mind, that creates ownership. It creates kind of an ambassador piece. It's helping you build a community around what you're doing, because the more involved with something and the more listened to a customer feels, the more likely they are to recommend and to kind of start the positive chatter about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I really appreciate the wildcard sort of thinking in there as well, that because sometimes those crazy way out ideas, even though they might not be sort of ready to go in your first version, they could potentially sort of come back in later on, and you just never know what's going to crop up from those interviews, right?
Yeah, completely.
And as far as selecting those 3, does that align with kind of like criteria or principles, or is that kind of like a dot vote scenario again?
Again, it's depending on what's agreed in advance. So sometimes it would be something as simple as dot voting, or basic vote or whatever, as to what those 3 wanted to be. Other times it would be one that the decision maker would kind of go with, or one that the financial controller would go with, one that the team would like to see, and then the one that the majority of people go, that would be amazing, but there's no way it's ever going to work. So that again, you have all of the politics, all of the dynamics, and kind of the balancing of that within this stage is done as well.
I'm quite interested to hear a little bit more around the culture piece. So, I've heard that you're doing some interviews potentially with each staff member prior to the workshop.
Yeah.
You're potentially doing some research with customers. And so how I look at that is you're learning quite a bit about the whole culture of the organization from a couple of different lenses. And how then do you support that organization in terms of, let's say, shifting their culture when they start going to an implementing piece as well? Is there any work that you do in that point?
Once the sort of idea through implementation has kind of happened, and I will always create a report, basically good old-fashioned report, but it is very visual as well within that, and it gives breakdowns in little video pieces or audio snippets and things of what's been said to kind of back up the evidence as well. And depending on the agreement, that would be passed across to the HR team. I can then help that department, if they wish, in looking at, again, creative ways of being able to amend the culture. I won't say change completely, because people get a bit terrified, but in kind of working with them so that culture does just become second nature, so that it's not that they've got to come back to this stage again, go through this whole process, but so that iteration is built right in. But that's very much down to the individual company or organisation, and a lot of time how I daren't say the word out, but how kind of precious they are about wanting other people involved within an organisation, within an area of the organisation that they feel a little bit more guarded about, perhaps. So I signed quite a few NDAs just around the design thinking and the workshop piece for services and product kind of development. When it comes to the HR piece, they are, in my experience, much more guarded around that. I think it's an area that people can criticise very quickly, that people can, it can't quite put it into words, but it's just an area that is a much more sensitive area.
Yeah. Sure.
So it depends, I can either give them the report, give them some ideas if I would suggest X, Y, and Z. If they want support carrying that out, then fantastic. But that has to be their decision at the end of the day.
Right. Really, really keen to sort of maybe just touch on a bit more around some of this buy-in. So I've just picked up there that, you're recording, I assume, from some interviews, but also snippets from the workshop, all that sort of thing. So actually showing the whole journey. And is it a typical way? And could you maybe sort of just tease that out a wee bit for us?
Typical way of doing it.
Yeah, that you're, if I'm reading it right, you're sort of building that story together and capturing it through the whole process.
Yeah. So what I start out with is that everybody has a whole range of senses. And so when I'm going through this journey, I need to make sure that I am using all of the senses within the workshops to make sure that however anybody learns or understands or shares, they have an opportunity to use their predominant sense and the sense they feel most comfortable with. So when we come to then sort of collating the information and sharing stuff within the report, that is why we also then have various elements that we will have either recorded or done audio footage of, or, shown them what the 3D model looks like or whatever, so that we're also kicking in those points. It doesn't mean that I set up a camera and kind of have, cameras and kind of Spanish Inquisition lights shining in every part of the thing. It does mean that people would sign a disclaimer, an agreement at the start to say that there are certain things that we will be recording, but this is about either seeing how you're interacting with a prototype. It's not about seeing your face, or it's about hearing what you've got to say about something. And to be fair, I think with the way social media is these days, people are so used to sharing their fish finger sandwich and, getting their selfies and things. Nobody usually has a problem with it at this point, but that's something that's addressed when we're picking who's going to be involved and such like. So we will just have certain parts of the process that experience dictates when I'm usually going to get the best kind of video or the best, little audio clips and such like. And that's the way that we do it. So I bland. I don't have a set framework for this because depending on the group dynamics is depending on when I will decide to say, I'm just going to set the camera to go now, or, it's kind of all being recorded via Otter or, actually there again, AI, that is something I do use, the Otter app. So as it's recording, it's word for word, and then I can go back through within their AI and say, kind of pull out some really interesting quotes about whatever for me. So that again is something that helps me refine, helps me with the admin element of it.
Right. And are you using that through the interviews with customers and things as well?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
No, look, I think that's super valuable. I mean, if I can share my sort of first experience of actually using a design thinking process, obviously you're familiar, we use the duck tree sort of model as overarching kind of framework. And the first time I'd use that in a consulting sort of piece, it was sort of finishing my MBA and you have to do a sort of a piece of work for a commercial organisation or a social enterprise or whatever. And so I was working in the social services sector, helping some organisations there. And what I found was, it was just, again, it was just another light bulb moment, was the robustness of doing that sort of research piece and capturing the voices of the people, sort of key elements, that sort of thing, and helping arrive at what the real problem is, and being able to demonstrate that when I came to sort of involve the stakeholders and show them the progress of the project, that it wasn't actually me saying this,
Yeah.
that they could largely
Yeah.
see that logically this is where we've arrived at. And so that was really powerful.
It's invaluable. Yeah. If you actually have a specific sentence or quote or something that is in somebody's voice that is your customer, it's harder to argue that
Yeah.
it's not worth implementing, or it's, it's completely invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you still get somebody say, oh, well, that's just one person or whatever,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
in general, yeah, it's been super valuable. Look, I've really appreciated the time that you've sort of shared with us today, Lucy. And perhaps before we sort of look to wrap things up on that, is there something there that you would like to sort of give some advice to somebody who's one or two pieces of advice for somebody who is looking to sort of get into the design thinking or human-centered innovation sort of way of working? What's a couple of tips there for them?
First of all, just start, but start small. Don't feel as though you need to know every single tool out there. Pick a book off a shelf, have a read at the different tools that can happen at different stages, and just choose to use one of them and just go about it in that way, because otherwise it can be very overwhelming. So start, but start simply and just start using one tool at a time. And I don't think you can go far wrong really with it. And continue to share and tell people how great it is and how useful it can be, because it can get a bad rep sometimes because people don't use it appropriately, or somebody reads a book, claims that it's useless, it's whatever. And I think that we need to make sure that we spread the design thinking love as far and wide as possible when it is being used well, and sharing the examples of good usage and good outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Lucy, a fitting way to end. Look, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights, your expertise in this world of design thinking, human-centered innovation. So really appreciate your time and looking forward to our next catch-up.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Lucy. Bye for now.